The lawyer for Director of Public Prosecutions, Paula Llewellyn, gets his turn in court. Also, what happens when court really gets boring? What happened? Stay tuned. Just as a reminder, this is a recap of day 2 of the Court of Appeal hearing into this issue of the DPP Retirement Age and the Constitutional Amendment Act that raised the retirement age from 60 to 65, both for the DPP and for the Auditor General. So I'm going to share something with you now. Court isn't Law and Order SVU. Court isn't even plain Law and Order, because sometimes court gets really, really boring. When I say boring, I mean bucking your head boring, falling off your chair boring, falling asleep boring. And respectfully, the submissions in the morning session by Alan Wood, he is the lawyer who is leading the team for the government, that session was dull. That session was boring. No, don't go and tell nobody. I say Mr. Wood is boring. That's not what I'm saying. But certain topics and the kind of arguments just don't generate a whole lot of excitement. All right. So this morning, I was really happy when the judges took this 5-minute stretch break, they call it. Now, both in the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal, the judges always take about a half-hour break mid-morning. But this court is the first I've heard of this 5-minute stretch break, which, I mean, is a really good idea. You know, sitting too long isn't good for you, not good for your health. Kind of wondering if they actually go around there and stretch or, do some yoga. Anyway, back in court. So Mr. Wood was talking about the important issue. Notice I'm acknowledging the issue is important of constitutional interpretation, but the subject itself is so boring that if I were to recap thoroughly what he said, I'd be here by myself and probably the 10 people in Jamaica who actually care about this stuff. Y'all know yourself, y'all are nerds, y'all are lawyers, but I'm not going there with you because I don't want to be on the channel by myself. So all I'm going to say about Mr. Wood's very important submissions is that he was urging the courts to look at the clear language of the act when making their determination and not to pull in other considerations, other principles of interpretation, like the so-called living tree doctrine. This is a doctrine that says that the Constitution isn't set in stone. It's flexible, it grows and evolves to meet changing times, and your interpretation can therefore do that as well. He said the court shouldn't go there because our highest court, the Privy Council of the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, has already rejected that doctrine. So, on to Mr. Lays. King's Counsel Douglas Lays is a lawyer who is representing DPP Paula Llewellyn. Now, just to say that this is a matter between government and opposition, but it concerns Ms. Llewellyn. So she asked the court's permission to be what is called an intervener, and she was allowed to come into the matter and therefore have a lawyer represent her as well. So that's what Mr. Lays is doing there. So he's representing DPP Llewellyn, and yes, I've just decided to call her DPP for the sake of simplicity. The government's position is that she's still the DPP, so let's just take that at face value because it just makes life easier than trying to figure out how to address her or how to describe her. Now, Mr. Lays focused very heavily on this question of early retirement. Just a quick reminder what this controversial Constitutional Amendment Act says. Part 1 of the Act raises the retirement age of the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Auditor General from 60 to 65. Most of the attention right now is on the second part of the Act. And Mr. Lays said, no, this is not a provision that was put in to allow her to stay. It was a provision to provide for her early retirement. Now, I have to just stop for a moment and say I found it really interesting that the main argument of Ms. Llewellyn's lawyer is that this act was to protect her right, preserve her right to early retirement. Why do I say it's interesting? Because the only reason we're here is because Ms. Llewellyn not only did not take early retirement, she went to retirement age, then asked for an extension and also wanted an additional 2 years on top of that. So very interesting. Now, Mr. Lays is basing his argument on the 2017 Pensions Act that raised the retirement age of public servants from 60 to 65 and the early retirement age from 55 to 60. It also provides transitional arrangements in relation to the early retirement issue, but he said that act doesn't cover the DPP, doesn't cover the Auditor General, and because of that, Parliament had to find a way to protect them and to protect their right to an early retirement. And the way Parliament did it, he said, was by passing this Constitutional Amendment Act. So, he got a little dramatic at one point, as lawyers like to do, and he said they were out in the cold. He said that the 2017 Pensions Act provided shelter for other public servants, but not for the DPP, not for the Auditor General, and that's what this Constitutional Amendment Act did. Now, at one stage, Justice Leng asked, hold on, so why didn't the act simply say the DPP can retire early, rather than use the language it used, which is now subject to all kinds of different interpretation by different people? To be fair, Mr. Lays didn't write the act. No, he also, that is Mr. Lays, took the really interesting position of saying that this section of the act, remember what I said, it allows the DPP who is in office when the act comes into effect to elect to remain in office. He said, unlike the arguments we heard before from Alan Wood, for instance, he said, this isn't a transitional provision, it's a permanent provision. And any DPP after that is going to be able, after Ms. Llewellyn, is going to be able to use this section of the act to take early retirement. So the judges were asking about that, saying, hold on, that's not what the words say, that's not what it's reading. And he stood his ground, so we're going to have to see if he's on solid ground there or on quicksand. I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me courtside. I'm Dionne Jackson Miller. I think I'm going to go take a stretch break myself.